Welcome, folks, to 52 Living Ideas. Today, we are back discussing the 12 Rules by Jordan Peterson. Jordan Peterson is back, so we're going to be talking about that very soon. But today, we're going to be talking about rule number 3. Make friends, people who want the best for you. Over to you, Roger and Claire.
Yeah, so last week we talked about, and in chapter 2, we talked about us as individuals having really an ethical obligation to take care of ourselves. And in this chapter, I think Peterson really builds on that and saying that we also have an ethical responsibility to surround yourselves with people who have, as he says, the courage, faith, and wisdom to wish you well when you've done something good and to stop you when you're doing something destructive. And he sets that up really for the first time in the book through narrative form and in talking about his own life. So I'll hand it over to you, Roger. Maybe you can talk about some of those examples.
Yeah, because I'd like to kind of go over just a quick overlay of some of the stories that he says, but I do kind of want to frame it with what he is trying to get to. So it doesn't sound like we're just talking about Peterson's friends from back home. Essentially, for this chapter, Peterson's kind of expanding on Rule 2, and he kind of wants to explore why do we tend to seek out relationships that are not good for us, right? And why do we stay in those relationships? I think everyone's had a bad friend. Everyone's had, at least hope maybe one bad relationship. But there seems to always be this, drive to kind of stay in problematic situations. And also, he kind of wants to address is like how friendship should be seen and how even our current friends should be in a way judged to a certain extent. And for him, he uses his own personal experience growing up to kind of show 2 different types of friends that he's made. So he starts the chapter by explaining just how much of a hellscape northern Canada can be. He goes a couple of paragraphs. He grew up in Fairview, Alberta. It's about 400 miles away from any big cities. And then he goes into his best boomer stories of just how cold Alberta is. It's so cold the smoke doesn't rise. It's so cold the most common way for cats to die was they would climb into the radiator seeking heat, and then someone would turn on the car. And just kind of a bunch of these anecdotes of just how cold and miserable life was up there, with the main point being that as a kid growing up there is literally nothing to do. There's no TV. There wasn't any real distractions. I think David earlier had mentioned it's almost more like survival rather than anything else. And it's in this setting that he mentions one of his friends, which is Chris. And he describes Chris as someone who was a really smart guy, liked to read a lot, and was, just very pragmatic and a natural engineer. And Peterson also notes, but on the other side, he was an angry and resentful person that, sometimes didn't have much hope. He wasn't a very hopeful person. And he points out that this was symbolized in his truck, in the truck that he drove. He describes it as every quarter panel had at least one dent on the inside and one dent on the outside. And the idea here, which will come up later, is the idea of externalizing your psyche. This will come up later when we talk about cleaning up your room. But it's the idea that what you believe inside is also what shapes the outside surroundings around you and your possessions specifically. But he mentions that Chris also had a cousin, and his cousin was named Ed, who was also tall, charming, good-looking, witty, essentially someone who was full of life and full of potential when Peterson meets him. He points out that both of them kind of, start to become stoners. They start to smoke a lot of marijuana, which he himself points out not fully against it. It can be great for some people, be not great for others. But he just points that out as kind of like they were starting to become more aimless. And he describes most of his time as just kind of cruising around Main Street or driving around, kind of, these aimless teenagers that don't really know what to even do in their life. And from there, he kind of really starts to dive into the nihilism that starts to come in that kind of environment by bringing up teen parties, right? Which, most of us remember. as being horrible or great, depending on where you are. But he points out, one of my favorite quotes here was, the low light and loud music basically keeps the conversations to a minimum and self-consciousness to a minimum. So essentially it's no need for depth here. It's just purely, the physical people being around each other. And he points out that in this setting, all the teenagers were already, before their life had even started, were already, cynical about life. They already didn't see a purpose. They didn't see a point. Growing up in this setting, it kind of prepped them to not really have anything to even aim at. They were just kind of stuck in this purgatory. And he points out the big difference when he moves, because his old friends drop out and he starts to make new ones. And these new ones, they're two brothers. Peterson describes them as both aiming up, both aiming to better themselves. And he notes and in doing so, just by the fact that they were my friends, it started to make me want to aim higher for myself, to want more for myself. It was almost as though seeing them succeed was then what made him question, could he succeed? One of them eventually becomes Peterson's roommate during community college. And then Peterson finally goes to college, and this is where he kind of explains that he really blossoms, because he starts to find a lot of like-minded people. They all have similar passions. He can talk to them about it. He notes, he assumes that everyone else has this experience, that whenever you leave your hometown, you just become this new, more you person. That, he also describes actually doesn't happen to a lot of people. Many people just move and they're the exact same person. But he notes that there is a perfect opportunity when you move to restart, to reclaim a different identity, which which is an interesting thing, because I think that's kind of Jung's initiation idea of when everything changes, you have the capacity to have a completely new personality arise. And essentially Peterson notes, all these new things and good things that he's doing. He's in a student union, he's starting a newspaper, and then he's starting to go into grad school and he's writing his maps of meaning. And he has Chris come up to visit him. And this is just kind of a small anecdote that he adds, but he says they get to the city, Chris had never been there, and the first thing they want to do is go buy pot. So they go to, a sketchy place. Claire, do you remember what city they're in? I don't remember. No? Well, they go to a sketchy place to buy marijuana, and then they just end up getting drunk and smashed in their hotel. And Peterson kind of points out they traveled 400 miles to be in the same place, right? What was the whole point of the trip if all you're doing is to be inebriated in a closed-in room? There was nothing that actually changed. And he says, but an event that made the point that I'm trying to make even stronger, Peterson points out, was when he met Ed, which was, if you remember, Chris's cousin. And Ed comes to visit him, and Peterson at this point really has started to get his stuff together, has this big Yamaha piano. It's kind of brags a little bit about him finally starting to organize his life. And Ed brings a friend over, and both of them are very high. They're they're blitzed out of their mind. And he kind of notices that, this Ed's lost all his charm that he had. He doesn't carry the same potential he used to, but he's still the same person. And he kind of notes that everything that made him attractive when he was younger is now what's starting to kind of actually make him not look as attractive now that he's older, because it's still the same childish charm that hasn't really developed into anything else. It's still just potential with no actuality. And so he kind of wants to draw these two comparisons between the friends he has that were kind of built, in northern Canada, and then the friends he has once he gets to college and is able to find people that are able to push him up. And just to conclude with the story of his friends so that we can start to get into his point, he notes that Peterson starts to ask, well, why did both Ed and Chris, why were they so unwilling to change their friendships? Why were they so committed to staying in that form of life? Why were they not willing to seek out or do what was necessary to change their lives? Like what was happening there? Can it all just be said that it was not their fault? And eventually Chris has a psychotic break and commits suicide. And Peterson wonders what were some of the causes of that, and it says, well, maybe it was the fact that maybe it was actually the marijuana that was actually helping him cope. Maybe he was just self-medicating. But he also points out, it's like, or it could have been the fact that his nihilistic belief and ideology had given him the rationalization to not have to try in life, right? If nothing matters, then why does it matter if you try? Why does it matter if you put any effort into anything? It becomes irrelevant very quickly. But that's still just a rationalization of the actions. And so that's kind of where he starts to actually build on his actual argument. But I want to take a break and see if Claire has anything that she wants to throw in before we just keep moving.
I think you've set that up beautifully. And I think it's in that rationalization, and he says Freud calls it this kind of like repetitive compulsion, that we surround ourselves actively with these people that will allow that compulsion to continue and allow that repetition. And why do we allow ourselves something that we know to be destructive? But there is comfort in it. And I think you're saying wisely that nihilism, it builds kind of self-contempt. And there's that just heartbreaking quote from, I think, Chris, the cousin. I had friends before anyone with enough self-contempt that they could forgive me mine. So I think there's this element also of truth that comes in, that when you really hate yourself, it's really hard to have an honest conversation with someone that doesn't hate themselves.
Yeah, and before we get really into his point, I do want to preface this that this chapter is really, very tough love Peterson. So there's going to be a lot of stuff that he says that may intuitively come off as either rude or cold. But if you actually get the point that he's trying to make, it's not nearly as cold as it may come off in our current culture. But one of the things that he points out is, why do they do this? Why do we all seem to seek things and seem to be okay with being in situations that aren't good for us, that aren't beneficial for us, that we know we shouldn't even bother to be in, or that we know our friendships and relationships we shouldn't support? And he says, well, it may be that we just have low opinions of ourselves, that we believe that is what we deserve. Or as Claire mentioned, it could be what Freud had termed the reputation compulsion, the idea that we have to repeat previous horrors. This isn't just some random human tick. It makes evolutionary sense. It's like, if you keep seeking a hard problem that you couldn't deal with the first time, eventually maybe you'll learn how to deal with it, and then you can tell others how to deal with it, right? So it's like there is a reason why we might have adapted to do this. And Peterson says, look, some of it may just be fate, right? Like the conditions you were in. Some of it may just be inability, right? What you can and can't do. And some part of, it's like, but there's also a part of it that's motivated refusal to learn, right? That you have a good reason to not actually look at the things that you could be looking at. And here's where he jumps into the rescuing of the damned, which gets pretty harsh. But because he's trying to point at something that I think our culture does need, but that I think is very hard to even talk about. And that is, when is it okay to help someone? And when is it you doing it for your own good, for your own sake? When is it a selfish action? And Peterson starts by saying, look, not everyone who you try to help is actually a victim. Many people knew exactly that this was going to happen, knew exactly what path they were on, didn't take any actions to change them on their own, right? So it's like, so maybe the victim narrative, though obviously applies to plenty of people, you shouldn't just assume that applies to all people. The second thing is, not everyone who is fallen wishes to rise, right? Not everyone who is in a hard place wants to come out. And the idea of like, why do you stay with that friend that you know isn't good for you. If your justification may be, oh, well, I just care about them, or it's for them, or like, well, they could do better, they can be better. You know, Peterson then asks, like, well, what makes you think you can help? What makes you think you're qualified to help? It's like, and more importantly, what makes you think that you're really not just being selfish here? What makes you think that you're not just doing this for your own validations and your own reasons? And I think for a lot of us that can somewhat resonate. I noticed when we talked about the idea of sacrifice, there was a huge conversation going on in several groups about whether altruism could be real, right? Whether someone could really act with purely good intentions. And Peterson's kind of flipping that on its head. It's like, well, not, or kind of just pointing to that directly, kind of saying, why would you assume that this friend that you got their back because they need you isn't really you just justifying your ability? And he kind of starts to dive into why that would be the case. He kind of points out, it's like, well, first of all, if you're helping someone, more than likely, it's pretty easy to justify that you're already doing better than them, right? Someone who's doing worse is not likely the person that's going to be helping. He also points out that, like, it looks good. It makes you look good to others. It validates that the problems that you have aren't nearly as bad as the problems this guy has, right? And it's like, which Peterson says, like, well, then why not find people that can help you rather than trying to fix this person that may not even be wanting your help, or may, even if they want it, may not actually be wanting to change anything about their lives themselves. And in here, he kind of starts to bring science in now. And he points out something that he's noticed a lot in grad students, but he also says there's been several studies over. And it's the idea that if you have a working team, and many of you probably have seen this at work, if you have a working team and you bring one person who's problematic, who complains a lot, doesn't want to do the work, is resentful, kind of undermines things, and put them in the team, what people might expect is like, oh, well, the team will kind of rally him up and push him up. And what he notes is, and that's not what happens, the delinquency is what spreads, right? Not the competence. And he says the reason that is it's a lot easier for the people that are trying really, really hard to stop trying as hard than for someone to start trying really, really hard, because it's hard, right? It's much easier to stop doing something that's hard than to get someone to do something very, very hard. And he points out that in the same way, our friendships also function like that. If you're succeeding at what you're doing, and your idea is like, well, I'll just bring my friend in too, don't be so sure that that would actually help you. Don't be so sure that that's not actually going to hurt you. And don't be so sure that your friend, though, for all intents and purposes has said that, and from their perspective may even want to be your friend, isn't also doing something that's undermining you. And it's the idea of an idol, of the Cain and Abel story, of whenever one person rises, immediately that you become a judge to everyone else. Anyone who can recognize you as better immediately becomes a comparison. And there's a part of humans that love to resent anything that's better than us, right? Like, to some extent, this probably has something to do with the dominance hierarchy and the idea of like, someone's getting ahead of us, I need to do something to either undermine that or get ahead of them. And that can happen among friends. It happens among family all the time. Brothers and sisters, that's a classic conflict. And just to kind of pass it to you, Claire, here in a little bit. But this idea that I found really fascinating is when he points out, because at the end of the day, failure is really easy to understand. Hatred, super easy to understand. Addiction, fear, promiscuity, betrayal, deception. It's like all of those require no explanation. It's like, that's our default, right? So it's like, so whenever you see someone who's doing quite well, or you yourself are doing quite well, and you reach out to a friend and the idea of like you helping them, why wouldn't you, he points out, it's like, you should always assume that you're doing the easiest thing and not the hardest thing, right? That friend that you think is like, oh, well, without me, they wouldn't be able to do anything. Another way of looking at it is like, or without them, you would actually have to do something hard. You would actually have to do something that you are scared of. rather than just dealing with something that they're scared of that you're not scared of at all. But that was a quote that I really liked. What was your thoughts about that, Claire?
Yeah, absolutely. And even more than that, taking away someone's pain or trying to help them presumes that you know what's best, as you already said, and that pain is actually pain. And I think this is just a core theme and comes back to sacrifice, is that there is so much meaning to be found in the trials and tribulations of someone's life. And so by exposing yourself to try to help the damned, you don't know what progress and how you are handicapping that individual's ability to help themselves. And then I think the kind of aha piece, as you say, and it's one that gets skewed because it does sound so selfish, is how easy helping other people throws us off. And if you're really following all of the other rules and you really are taking full care of yourself, that's going to be enough work for a long time. And until you've really mastered that, and you've expanded what yourself means, maybe it means your neighborhood, maybe it means your job, your community, that doesn't have to be an individualistic thing, but being really cautious as you expand that realm of influence and care, because once you knock yourself off, a lot more can follow, and it's really difficult to kind of break things up from there.
Yeah, and I do feel like he points out that the main idea behind this, and the main idea of not willing to throw yourself on your sword unnecessarily, right? When it's not deemed that, because you're simply trying to mimic this selflessness that our culture has taught us to have, which is not a bad thing. It's just a matter of you're just doing it in an easy situation because it gives you brownie points for yourself and it makes you believe you're better than you actually are, when actually real sacrifice of those natures would be much harder to do. You wouldn't just be able to do it just by staying in and talking to your friend for a couple of hours. He does point out the Carl Rogers principle and the idea that before anyone could ever have successful therapy, Carl Rogers always believed that the individual themselves had to want to improve. Without that, there is no change. So if you're with, the idea is like of you being someone's friend and you being like, man, if I can only get them to get their stuff together, if I can only get them to realize, certain things, if they're not the ones that are actively trying to change their lives, it's very, very hard for someone else to change their lives. It happens, but it's, as Peterson kind of keeps trying to point out, all these things that we're aiming for are good things, right? Rescuing someone, being there for someone, doing the hard parts, being there for all the hard parts for them. But he points out, it's like a lot of times the things we do are easy versions of that allow us to get away with not having to look at all the potential we're losing, all the things we've given up on, all the things we don't want to look at. Because yeah, maybe I haven't done all the things I told myself I would do, but hey, man, I'm helping these people. I'm, and I've known these people since we were kids. So of course, I have to do it. And Peterson kind of points out, it's like, no, you don't. There's nothing moral about going down with a sinking ship. There's nothing, and a good quote is that two drowned people is not an improvement over one, right? Like two people that both fall is not somehow better or more moral than that one person that wasn't willing to do anything. And
question on that one, Roger, because I it's profound, this idea that morally it's okay to shy away from people who are going to drag you down and are in a negative situation. And I think that's a comforting thing to hear, but unlike most of Peterson, it doesn't land well. So why it feels still uncomfortable. It doesn't feel morally right. Why do you think that is, if it is in fact?
Because it requires that we accept some form of self-serving, which I think our culture, especially American culture, has greatly pushed us towards never admitting. It's always the bad guys in the movies that admit that they care about themselves, right? Like it's always represented as the most negative thing, but the reality is it's those things of like intent versus actual effect. So like if your intent may be great, right? You may have convinced yourself and your friend that you guys are going to really help each other. But then if you take enough distance or just see it from like a third person perspective, it's like, well, what's actually happening here? It's like if you're, and of course, Peterson isn't just saying abandon all hope and just get out of here. It's more a matter of like, look, redemption is possible, but it's extremely, extremely hard. And it's not extremely hard for the friends. It's extremely hard for the person that's trying to climb out of that ditch. So if you're not seeing that effort from them and you're holding yourself back because you think they should, it's like, it's you who's sacrificing for possibly nothing. One quote he says is that, how do you know your suffering is not a demand of martyrdom for my resources? Right? How do you know that your friend, I mean, for me, this is like very much like a psychoanalytical take of like, look, humans lie to themselves all the time. Most of us don't even know anything about ourselves. Why would you assume that you know anything about your friend? Why would you assume that you understand their motivations when likely they probably don't understand their motivations? When likely there's plenty of things they don't want to face? Why would you assume that somehow you can come in as an outside force with less information and solve their problems? Right? So like that's kind of that approach. And the final one he kind of takes on is, all right, fine. What is friendship supposed to be then?
Roger, can I jump in?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, I just want to try to tease out all the issues here in as simple way as possible.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there are three things I can see. One is that either a person is going up or they're going down. And that's kind of coming from within. If a person wants to go down, they want to go down. So that's one issue. Is the person going up or are they going down? And that applies to yourself. It applies to other people, each person. The second thing, this is a point that I got from this Monday's lecture by Sean Croxton. He says that most people, in their attempt to get along, they do not get ahead. So they want to get along, and getting along, because we are social beings, is such a large psychological factor for us that our friends, just because they are our friends, our family, just because they are our family, our desire to get along with them will stop us from getting ahead. So there is that conflict between going up and getting along. And third thing is the issue of pretense. Everybody wants the moral credit for thinking that they're going up, even when they are actually going down. So that's why, he's cautioning us is that, you should assume that you are doing the easiest thing, not the hardest thing. So I see those three issues. What do you think?
Yeah, I guess the only adjustment I would make is the first one of like people are either going up or going down. I think Peterson would likely put it more as everyone is going down and it's a lot of work to start to go up. So it's much, much easier to just either stay stagnant or wait. And like some people are aiming to go down, like some people that are genuinely just embracing the chaotic nature of life in a very extreme way, definitely. But I think like he points out himself, it's like things naturally fall apart by themselves, but man's sin speeds it up, right? It's like our own sins, our own shortcomings, our own failures are what just bring that about quicker. So it's the idea is like we're constantly fighting entropy, we're constantly fighting to be more than what we'll eventually become. But at the end of the day, everyone is already dropping, and even so kind of having to run up.
Yeah, that's a great way of putting it. What you're saying is that default is down.
Yeah.
There is gravity. If you're going to go up, you have to decide to go up, and you have to make that decision and stick to that decision on a continual basis. The moment you stop, you start going down.
Right.
Yes, absolutely. That's the nature of up and down. Yes.
Because in I think in Maps of Meaning lecture, he always mentions this the Red Queen from Alice in Wonderland, where he says like, in order to stay, you have to run as fast as you can just to stay in the same place. It's like in my world. And that was like his analogy of like trying to just stay on top of things.
Excellent. Thank you.
And I think the way that this sort of solves for itself, and my lived experience of really trying to apply this in my life, is that the most effective way I have ever found to actually change human behavior is by leading by example. It is just by doing something and focusing in my own lane, and it just catches a glimmer of someone and that sticks. I think about this a lot in terms of like animal behavior. We all have cats and dogs that know they're doing the wrong thing, and they look you in the eye and they still do it. And it takes sort of turning around sometimes and ignoring them to let them come to that conclusion on their own. And I think that, yes, Peterson would say we are not moral superior beings to each other. We all have the same sort of moral software, and humans, if given an aim, will tend to hopefully make good decisions for themselves if they are surrounded by others that are doing the same. And who are you to think that you're better off than them? So I always kind of use that, just think of a stubborn pet in that case of empowering someone to make their own decisions, but staying in your lane. That allows you to not trip yourself up, stay focused and improve yourself, and the ripples, I think, go from there.
Thank you.
Yeah, and just to hit one last one, because it was a big one in my head of like the whole time I was reading this chapter, I'm like, yeah, but like I'm loyal to my friends. Like, they're my friends. I'm loyal to them. And Peterson, he waits till the very end to point this out, but he says, yeah, but loyalty and stupidity aren't the same thing. And it's like, loyalty should be negotiated fairly and honestly, right? Like the point of a friendship is that's a reciprocal or arrangement or agreement. And I started to think about that and kind of going with his theory of this idea that we first enact behavior and embody behavior. It's only way, way later that we start to consciously conceptualize it. And it's this idea of like, yeah, with certain friends, I have made it quite explicit, where it's like, hey, man, I'm counting on you to do this, this, and this, and you can count on me to do this, this, and this. And with other friends, it's purely implicit. We've never had that conversation, especially like really old friends. Like we've just always been friends almost out of tradition more than anything else. But yeah, I felt like that was a pretty big aspect of it. And then
and Peterson, he says like naivety is not morality, and that it goes across everything, right? So just because it's simple and easy and feels right doesn't mean it's ethical.
So Peterson closes out the chapter by kind of explaining what a friends should do. And he points out that your friends should be the ones that are constantly reminding you that you can be more than you currently are. And that they won't necessarily reward or be okay with you when you're cynical or destructive, right? That like you want the kinds of friends that like when you do get in your little emo stages of life is meaningless, this is horrible, I suck at everything, that they'll be the ones that pull you out, that they're like, are you kidding me? Like, look, you're this, you're this, and bring you out of that darkness rather than being like, yeah, life is meaningless, man. Let's just not think about the stuff that we're just sacrificing right now. Let's just chill here and just have fun. And finally, the last thing is he points out that as you improve, you will also, it's like, one, to improve is actually the hard part. It's to maintain the friends you have, to maintain all that. It's like, if it's really easy, it's like, well, yeah, that's why everyone does it. That's why everyone kind of sticks in this. It's like the hard part is to seek out friends that want the best for you, because the people that want the best for you are going to be critical. They are going to point you out when you fail. They are going to, in friend-like ways, but they are going to tell you, like, hey, I expected better than you. Like for me, the most hurtful thing I've ever heard was a friend that just kind of, I said something and I thought she was going to be upset. And she's like, no, I'm just disappointed. And like, that was way worse than just being upset. I would have wished you just yelled at me, because it was the sense of like, I let myself down. And in doing that, I let you down. And so that's why he says, like, look, it's a harder course to be healthy and, to be good and healthy. And that's why it's an ideal. And he encourages you that with some courage and some humility to be aware of two uncritical compassion and pity, and to make friends with people who want the best for you. And I thought that was like how he ends the chapter is just so beautiful, as far as being able to both see that, like, just because you're passionate and just because you care about someone doesn't make you good, doesn't make you right. It might just make you a fool.
Shall we go to questions?
Yeah, just jump into it.
Okay. Give me just a second. So folks, we have the standard rules. We have 4 rules. Raise your hand when you have questions. You can do that by typing a question, typing exclamation mark, or raising your hand in Zoom. Number 2, keep on topic. Number 3, be brief. And number 4, be courteous. Feel free to disagree with anything. All right, so it's going to be Joe, Nicole, Stefan, and James next. Joe, go ahead.
Thank you both for presenting again.
You muted yourself, Joe. So.
Thank you for presenting. I really appreciate your input on this chapter as well, as always. Isn't there a risk of you start to look at people as a means to an end, as opposed to people in themselves, if you take this approach, in the sense that you're only looking at what they can do for you to bring you up, or what you're as opposed to maybe saying to yourself, the only difference between me and the other person is that maybe it's the situation I was in that allowed me to flourish, and it's maybe a lack of humility to a certain degree.
Right. And Peterson, so 2 things. One, Peterson points out that if you do that, right, if you do say, well, maybe it was just completely not in their control at all, it's like, all right, you can do that. However, in doing that, the way you're framing the entire narrative and the entire reality is there was nothing they could have done, which means, okay, so they didn't have any agency, right? They didn't have any power to do anything about their own situation. It's like, all right, if you want to interpret the world as that, which, plenty of people do, right? Like that's not an uncommon view. It's pure nurture. It's just the circumstance in which you were born. What he points out is you've essentially eliminated responsibility and free will. And one of the main reasons why that matters so much for Peterson is because for Peterson, it's responsibility that actually creates a lot of meaning in life, because it's essentially putting skin in the game. If you're saying you're responsible for something in life, you're saying, I care about this enough that if something bad happens, it's on me, right? I'll take care of this. Like, and you're allowing yourself to care about the game that you're in. But all that kind of gets evened out if you take an extreme view of like, well, no, there's nothing they could do. Now, at the same time, Peterson does note, like, yeah, plenty of that are factors. Like plenty of those, those are all obviously always in play. But the second thing, and to the second point about seeing people as just means, the only thing you're seeking here is people that want you to be the best person you are, right? It's not go find the richest guy, don't make friends with the richest people, or make friends with the most connected people, or make friends with any of that. It's just simply someone that wants to see you be the best thing you could be. If you surround yourself with people like that, you'll enable yourself, and that's the best way to get that side of you out. Whereas if you surround yourself with people that accept you as who you are now, right? It's like, well, why? It's like, well, because they also don't want to change themselves. They don't want anyone calling them out on their own failings. And look, let's just stay at status quo. And then as things deteriorate, because the world's always doing that, it's like, we'll slowly become resentful 20, 30 years later when we look around and the people that didn't follow the strategy that we did have achieved more, right? And kind of what he compares is to the Cain and the Abel, right? It's like, you can be Abel and throw everything you got at it and possibly rise, or possibly not, right? Or it can be Cain and become resentful of the people that did get it, right? And that's kind of what he points to. You also can't say that the friend that you're sticking around to help doesn't have that sentiment, right? Because more than likely they may not even know themselves. It's this idea of the subconscious actions that are being played out.
Yeah, I would agree. I think it is a Kantian idea here in that, you know, seeing everyone's inherent true value in godlike form and respecting that and respecting their ability to get them out of, and the success of themselves to get out of their own mess.
Okay, next up is Nicole. Nicole, go ahead. Nicole, you need to unmute yourself and ask the question. All right, let's read out the question. I'm going to read out the question for you. What is the line that you will draw to end a friendship that you think it's not good for you? For example, if your friend is ordinary in private sphere, but they hold some very extreme unethical views due to their own hurt or pain. So what is the line?
Sorry, I just unmute myself. I just want to add something. When I say like unethical radical views, it's like something like, let's say, a really opposing political views, which you think they are fundamentally wrong and you can't put up with it. So let's say generalization. Let's say some people would say, okay, so all the right people are racist, or Asian people are, don't have the ability to, excel in certain fields, stuff like that. What if you have friends like that? But these people, they are quite nice to you when it comes to, your private life. They're caring. They look after you, but they just have those, unethical perspectives that you can't agree with.
Yeah, so I mean, from Peterson's point of view, it's more of an idea of just you're looking more for that personal aspect, right? Like the fact that, like, if they're genuinely the person that will help you be better, that will help your life be better, essentially. And by better, not just necessarily giving you things or, babying you in any sense, but to help you become better and whatever better means for you. It's like Peterson's point is those are the friends that will eventually help you. However, with your point about, their own personal beliefs or their own personal values, I would say you have to account for that as to how it affects you, right? So maybe the values aren't necessarily the issue here as much as how much do the values affect you, right? Like, and I don't mean like the values directly, just the fact that you have friends that have those values, right? Personally, how do they affect you? From my personal view, I would say I find a lot of value in having friends that I completely vehemently disagree with and think they're idiots for believing what they believe. But I find it very important to have them because they think the same thing. And because we have that friendship, it allows us to have conversations that I wouldn't otherwise be able to have from people from a different side, right? It allows me to be very honest about my opinions and allows them to be very honest about theirs and allows us to actually compare notes and both of us be exposed to views that we probably otherwise wouldn't be.
The value of friendship also is a very kind of Greek, ancient, Platonic, Socratic idea that you surround yourself with people in which ask stimulating questions and can push you in different directions intellectually. And I think that element of honest, hard-hitting discourse is something that Peterson is in favor of and is trying to bring back here to the forefront.
Next up is Stefan. Stefan, go ahead. Stefan, you need to unmute yourself. Okay, next one up is James. James, go ahead.
Yeah, it sounds like Peterson is anti-collective of any kind, anything, and including real friendships. I mean, it seems like when he talks about his friends, he's always thinking about what that friend can do for him, but not what he can do for them. And just looking at some of his other interviews, he doesn't belong to any particular group or if he does, it's sort of like the very libertarian, and he's kind of like, you know, against feminism, against any kind of collective social ideology. Is that true?
I wouldn't say to that extreme. I don't think he's completely anti-collective. I think if he's actually normally identifies as a little bit left, classical left, but I think more of what he's saying, and again, it's a clarification, because like that's why I wanted to preface it, because it isn't as though he's saying you should only see friendships for the value that they give you, but rather you should seek out friends that are attempting to help you improve you in the way that you're wanting to. And you should not use, because it's kind of the other way around, you should not use the friends you currently have as excuses for not being the best that you could be. And more what he's trying to point out is that people do that all the time.
And you can be the best. The ability you have to be the best friend to others comes from taking care of yourself first. And you're actually doing the greatest service to someone by not keeping around people that you're using for a narcissistic reason.
I would like to add one thing. I always like to bring in the syntopical angle of, you know, other people's thought on the same topic. So on this, I think Aristotle has amazing things to say about friendship. You know, he identifies three kinds of friendships: friends of pleasure, which is based on kind of enjoyment of interaction; friends of utility, which is based on the benefits that you derive; and friends of character or friends of virtue, which is basically based on admiration of each other's characters. And most of this discussion of Jordan Peterson is focused on that third category of friends of virtue, of people who are going up, people who want you to go up, and we support each other in doing that. So I think that's next one up is Jean. Jean, go ahead. Jean, followed by Loic.
Yeah, I actually want to share with you. I actually have some experience with this talking about friendship, and but also about helping others. I think I'm actually not very good at helping others because there are always like so much things I need to improve. I feel myself, and my husband just the opposite. He always help others, and I actually point out to him as I read from a book, the person trying to help others usually the one who really need help. So, and I think part of the reason, because they need help, they can identify the needs from other person. So they can actually see that. When you most people don't see it. So I think it's very hard to see what is good, what is bad. It's just different type of personality. And also talking about the friendship, I agree. You know, I used to have a lot of friends because I don't like to make effort. So I found I surrounded a friend who is not less capable than me. So one day I realized, I took landmark training. I realized, wow, this is what's happening to me, because they all like try hard to reach me and I don't make effort. So I enjoy the friendship. I don't need to make much effort. Then I realized that I said, I need to challenge myself. So I actually reached out to someone I really admire in some sense, like an artist. I thought, oh, she's a great artist. She tried to host this party. So I actually registered to join, and I actually make friends with her and two other professional women, and we become good friends. So that actually show, you know, like if people don't feel jealous, they said they have to be same or above level than you. The people who are lower level than you, they will feel jealous. You know, they won't be happy with your accomplishment, because if they're similar level, above level than you, they will never feel jealous. That's the friendship I think you have to make. And we have all kinds of friends. You know, I found you know, this type of friendship is more idealized friendship, like what Kang mentioned. But we have all other type of friends. But I mean, the real friend really need to have been similar level, and it had to change because we change all the time.
Thank you. Thank you, Jean. I found question from Stefan. He asks, if going down is the default state for human beings, then is that why it's hard to leave a sour relationship? So you would have to have a strong upward trajectory to even conceptualize of greener pastures.
Yeah, so he actually talks about aspect of that too, where he essentially points out, it's like, well, why don't people leave? It's like, well, one of the reasons is, maybe they can't, but another main reason is no other opportunity has presented itself, right? They have nowhere else to jump. Something I learned in my first psychology class was the lily pad effect. And it's the idea that most relationships don't end until the partner that wants to leave has another partner ready and willing to go. And it's like a frog waiting for a lily pad. And so even if, like Stefan mentioned, like even if there is a sour relationship, someone will hold on because jumping out of that relationship is just into chaos. So if you have someone else that is going to catch you, it's like, all right, fine, now I can let go. But yeah, no, I think that's quite a fair observation.
Okay, so next up is going to be Loy, Sanjay, Sophie, and Christian. Loy, go ahead.
Hi, my question is mostly the emotional bond you have people you call friends. I'm not talking about the utility of networking. I'm talking about I don't think of, hey, is this person going to help me get ahead or not? They are just my friends. Those questions don't even arise.
Yeah, and all Peterson's asking is maybe they should, right? All Peterson's saying is, well, then if that's the case, then you could explore this and you have nothing to worry about, right? Because there'll be something that they give you and there's be something that you give them. But Peterson more points out, it's the fact that a lot of times we don't even want to look to see what's under there to even understand it, that he kind of points out is where problems may arise. But I mean, yeah, one of the main reasons we want friends and we love friends is because of the emotional bonds. And someone else also mentioned because of the history, right? But at the end of the day, you kind of just have to conceptualize. And Peterson here is more talking about people that are holding you back or pulling you down, right? So it's more a matter of people that in a way are making things worse for you and everyone else, right? It's like those are the friends that it's okay to walk away from them. And then if you're going to choose new friends, why not choose the ones that would be best for you, right? So that's more of his general point. It's like, if you have really bad friends, and I mean, I've known people that, would hang out with people that all the time were just always insulting them all the time. And I could not understand why you'd be friends with any of these people. They all seem to hate you. And it was, the idea is like, well, no one else wanted to be friends with me, right? It's this fear of like, no one else would want to. No one, like, I don't know how to make friends. And these were the only group that accepted me. So that's where I'm at. Similar to the relationship in the lily pad, right? But yeah, I would say that Pearson would likely say, it's like, well, then I would, explore your relationships, explore what you give, explore what they give. And if it's a fair deal in your eyes, it's a fair deal in your eyes. It's your friendship at the end.
Next up is Sanjay, Sophie, and Christian. Sanjay, go ahead.
Hi. So we know Peterson talks about how difficult it is to understand and change our own behaviors. Everybody has emotional drivers within our subconscious that we're not fully aware of, that make us behave in many ways. This includes drivers that make us think in different ways. So my question, maybe it's a rhetorical question, but my question is, how can we make decisions that are best for us, in terms of changing friends or finding friends or helping the right people, when we aren't fully in control of ourselves? For example, emotional drivers will make us do the wrong things, including, I think most importantly, they'll make us feel good about the bad decisions that we're making.
Yeah, so I would say that that's the risk with any choice, right? No matter what. But I would say that's also why kind of Peterson abstracts it more to make friends with people that want the best for you, in other sense that, like, you want to try to align yourself with people that, at least as best as you can tell, which is all you can ever really do, you know, you can't break past your own perceptions, but as best as you can tell, align yourself with people that are genuinely wanting the best for you and that will treat you in such a way that they know that you're better than what you currently are, and that they'll push you to, at least to some extent, or that they'll just support you in achieving that. And it's this idea, it's so, yeah, naturally, you know, maybe you might get into your head that you're a rock star, and then you start hanging out with nothing but people that are telling you you'd be an awesome rock star. But if you were following more of Peterson's advice, rather than just getting people to tell you what you already want to hear, you'd get someone to tell you, hey man, I don't think you're going to make it as a rock star. Like, I love you and you're great, but like, I don't think that'd be a good place for you. Right? Like that would be a real friend, right? A real friend is someone that wants the best for you, not someone that wants you to live your fantasy, but someone that can truly be honest with you because they care about you. One metric that Peterson uses is, if you have a friend that you wouldn't recommend to your brother, or to your father, your sister, or your son, why would you be friends with them? Right? So kind of more that end rather than just you know, a decision. It's more of a virtue that you're looking for almost.
And the rules are also going to stack on top of each other as tools to help you do that. So I think truth telling, paying attention, being precise in your speech, all of these are going to become tools and muscles that will become more strong to help you navigate those friendships.
Just as a clarification, I mean, if our mind is wanting to do things for itself, you know, not necessarily what's best for us, but best for what's inside of our subconscious, then in a sense, we can't, I feel like we can't do what's best for us in the moment. Maybe, you know, looking back at it a year from now, we might be able to figure it out. But in the moment, I think it's very, very hard. It's almost impossible for most people.
So one of the things I would say is that, so we again, kind of bringing up the syntopical angle, we looked at Ray Dalio, and we looked at Daniel Kahneman. One of the critical conclusions of Daniel Kahneman's book is that somebody else's system 2 can spot what is going on with your system 1 better than your own system 2. So, and that is, from as far as I can see, that is the primary, like the biggest value a friend can offer you, because they actually know you and they actually care about you. So whenever you're doing something where you are you're unaware of it, a good friend, because they, one, know you, and two, care about you, can point that out to you. And they can point that out to you better than you can yourself notice. And that is a very large value of friendship. Next up is Sophie, followed by Christian, and then we will go to breakout rooms. Sophie, go ahead. Okay, let's go to Christian. Christine, go ahead.
Hi. So my question was, what if you know that a friend does care about you and wants the best for you, but they have a different opinion of what exactly is best for you? Like, I don't have this experience, but I'm just going to come up with an example. Like maybe you're trying to pursue a certain career, and maybe they believe that that is not the best for you.
Right. So that is very common. It can happen all the time, I think. But I also think that if it's genuine, that's still a better start than someone who doesn't, right? So like that's already starting a little bit better, but then that can then be clarified. I feel like that dynamic tends to play out a lot with parents specifically, right? You know, my parents want me to be a doctor. I want to be a musician. And, you know, both of us think that that is the best for me, right? And there can be that conversation, but at the same time, because they want that, they also are still pushing you to something that they see as your highest potential, which can make you at least consider that, right? You can be like, well, maybe I would be a decent doctor. And it's like, and if that's not what it is you want, or that's not what you think would be the best use of your time, you can still choose not to. But you know you have someone that is supporting you either way. And if they truly do love you and want the best for you, if you tell them, it's like, yeah, but I'm never going to do that, then they're like, fine, I think you could be better than that, but fine, we'll go with, like, be the best thing that you think you can be, and we'll take that path. Although I think you'd be an awesome surgeon, right? But I don't think that's necessarily something that works against that flow.
So on this one, again, there is a wonderful syntopical point from Ray Dalio. He has a concept called believability. So it's like, you see, not everybody is good at everything. And one of the things that when we're discussing this rule in our group, one of the things that came out is that whenever people generally give advice to other people, they generally give advice to a person assuming that other person is exactly like them. And that advice can be completely off. Though it is very well-meaning, they're just giving you advice what they would like to hear if you were in their position. So Ray Dalio has this very good concept of believability score, where you keep track of what is it that your friends have been good at, and what are their strengths. And you can say, look, when it comes to planning, I will never listen to this person, but I will always listen to this person. When I'm talking about, on the other hand, when I talk about how are different people feeling, the person who is horrible at planning, he knows what other people are actually feeling, whereas this other guy has no clue. So you kind of keep track of it, and you always, whenever somebody's giving you feedback, you always keep that in mind. Ultimately, you are the judge, and you have to make the judgment yourself. It's your life. So you take all these inputs, you evaluate them, not just at that moment, but over the entire history of your interaction with people, and cross-check against one another in order to get the best point. Okay, so next one up is John. So it's John followed by Hannah. John, go ahead.
Yeah, in one of Peterson's other psychology lectures, he talks about sort of the sort of like crummy things people do to each other, like in families and things. And he said one of the most evil things you can do is to have someone close to you who trusts you, depends on you, to have like a big success, and for you to like not show approval of that. So you're basically discouraging the validation, the trust they're putting in you, validation. Think somebody who's maybe not doing good at school, and they for some reason they get an A in one of their tests, and they come home to their father, and their father, who may not be like one of the best people in the world, sort of just is like, whatever, or doesn't want to show approval because that, for whatever reason they're doing that. But that sort of is this discouraging of someone's, of celebrating your friend's successes, I think goes to the core of what Peterson's talking about around surrounding yourself with people who care about you and support you. It's that social reinforcement that you're doing well in that goal you're setting yourself out to achieve, and the friends, your good friends, are the ones who will support you in that, whatever that is, if that thing is agreed to be moral and just.
Yeah, that's a great point, right? That like a good friend is a friend that validates and reinforces you when you do things you should be proud of, right? Like that, like it's like if I get a promotion, like that should be something that, if it's a real friend, will be happy for me. And like that was originally when Peterson wrote this book, he had I think 48 rules, and he like narrowed them down to 12. And two of the rules that I really like that aren't in the book, it was be careful who you share bad news with, and be careful who you share good news with. And it was on that same theme of like, if you're telling someone good news, make sure they're the type of person that's going to give you the response you want, because they might actually undermine the very good news that you actually have. But yeah, no, great point.
Okay, talking of good news, Roger and Claire, I hear that there is good news about Jordan Peterson. So could you please share with others who have not heard about it?
Go ahead, Claire.
Oh, what an honor. Yes, there's really, really great news in the land of Peterson. Peterson did his first interview this week on Michaela Peterson, his daughter's podcast. It was the first time we'd heard from him for over a year. And they really just had an honest and brutal and heart-wrenching but beautiful conversation about his struggles going on benzos, and just their family is really epic year between Tammy having cancer and I think we've just been really nerding out on it because it's, first of all, beautiful to hear his voice again. He's working on a book. We were worried about him for a while, but it also is such a harrowing example of everything that he teaches and kind of Jung's journey and all that. What do you think, Roger?
Yeah, so very exciting to have seen him back and okay. We were, like you said, we were kind of worried about him because one of the first reports that we had gotten, that everyone had gotten, was that there may have been, that he was in a coma and that there may have been brain damage to him. So we didn't know what was going to happen or how he was going to end up. In the interview, he seems extremely sharp, still recovering, obviously, but pretty good for considering everything he's gone through. And I just posted a link for that interview where he kind of does retell where he's been for the past year, and it's an epic story. And it ironically fits very much in the archetypical structure of stuff that Peterson loves to talk about, and with a very touching end. So I would highly recommend that to anyone. I'm pretty sure we'll probably be seeing more Peterson in the coming months, hopefully, because we definitely.
And then also just sort of join us on this journey. I mean, I think if timing works well, we're kind of 3 chapters in. We have much more to go in this book, and hopefully Peterson will be right there on the tail end, and we can pick up with some of his new ideas. I mean, I think with each new video he posts and every new article, we get to kind of have our collective conscious come a little farther. And we were nerding out on the fact that this book, we won't spoil it, has a beautiful final chapter, which is just an ominous foreshadowing of where he kind of led to now. But hey, it brings me a lot of strength, and I think that you know that even the strongest with the most powerful toolkit are susceptible to fall and have Achilles heels, and it's really, I think, empowering for me, and I'm sure all of us, to see him on the fight back.